In the Lowcountry of South Carolina, the Murdaugh name wasn't just respected, it was untouchable. For nearly a century, 3 generations of Murdaugh men served as the elected solicitor for the 14th Judicial Circuit. Their portraits hung on courthouse walls. Their voices echoed through courtrooms. Their handshake could open doors or quietly close them. In Hampton County, justice often had a familiar last name. At the center of that legacy stood Alex Murdaugh. He was tall, red-haired, affable, a personal injury lawyer who seemed to know everyone. If you were hurt in a car crash, he'd fight for you. If you were in trouble, he might make a call. The Murdaugh family law firm had secured multi-million-dollar settlements. Their lifestyle reflected it. A sprawling hunting estate called Moselle, luxury vehicles, private schools for the kids. From the outside, it looked like the American South's version of royalty. Alex's wife, Maggie, came from a well-off family herself. Friends described her as warm but strong-willed. Their 2 sons, Buster and Paul, grew up surrounded by privilege, football games, boating trips, and the quiet understanding that their last name meant something. But power has a way of blinding people to consequences. On a February night in 2019, that illusion cracked. Paul Murdaugh, then 19, allegedly drove his family's boat while heavily intoxicated. The boat slammed into a bridge piling near Paris Island. 19-year-old Mallory Beach was thrown into the dark water. Her body was found days later. The crash sent shockwaves through the Lowcountry. Witnesses described chaos that night, frantic calls, injured teenagers, and confusion over who was actually driving. Some claimed Paul had used his older brother's ID to purchase alcohol. Others said he was reckless and belligerent. But what fueled public suspicion wasn't just the tragedy. It was what happened afterward. Hospital staff reported that members of the Murdaugh family appeared quickly. There were whispers of pressure, subtle attempts to shape statements, to steer the narrative. Online forums lit up. Locals began asking a question few had ever dared to ask before. Was the Murdaugh name shielding someone from accountability? Paul was eventually charged with boating under the influence, causing death. He pleaded not guilty. A civil lawsuit followed, targeting Alex and Maggie for allegedly allowing their son access to alcohol and the boat. For the first time in generations, the Murdaugh family was on the defensive. And then, just as legal pressure mounted, something else surfaced. Behind the polished image of courtroom victories and family legacy, Alex Murdaugh had secrets, financial ones. In September 2021, Alex reported that he had been shot on the side of a rural road while changing a tire. The story sounded dramatic: a passing truck, a sudden gunshot, blood on the pavement. He survived with what authorities described as a superficial head wound. At first, it looked like an attempted murder. But investigators quickly uncovered a different story. The shooting had been staged. Alex had allegedly arranged for a distant cousin to shoot him, an attempt prosecutors later claimed, to secure a $10 million life insurance payout for his surviving son. The revelation stunned the state. Why would a wealthy attorney fake his own murder? The answer began to unravel just days later when Alex admitted to something that shook even his closest colleagues. He had stolen money. Not just once, not just twice, but allegedly millions of dollars over more than a decade. Clients who trusted him, including vulnerable accident victims, had been misled. Settlement checks were redirected. Funds vanished. The numbers grew with every investigation. The dynasty wasn't just cracking. It was collapsing. Then came June 7, 2021. At approximately 10 p.m., Alex called 911 from the Moselle property. His voice trembled as he told dispatchers that his wife and son had been shot near the dog kennels. When law enforcement arrived, they found Maggie and Paul dead. The scene was brutal. Paul had suffered catastrophic injuries from a shotgun blast. Maggie had been shot multiple times with what investigators believed was a rifle. 2 weapons, 2 victims, one powerful family at the center. The timing was impossible to ignore. Paul was awaiting trial in the boating case. Alex was under growing scrutiny for financial misconduct. Lawsuits were tightening around him. Suddenly, The narrative shifted from financial scandal to double homicide. In interviews with investigators, Alex insisted he had been visiting his ailing father that evening. He claimed he discovered the bodies upon returning home. His voice on body cam footage sounded frantic, almost desperate. "I would never hurt my wife and my son," he told authorities. But the public, once silent, was no longer willing to accept assurances at face value. Rumors spread quickly. Was this retaliation connected to the boat crash? Was it linked to drugs? Was it a targeted attack meant to silence Paul before trial? Or was something closer to home? As investigators combed through the property, they examined shell casings, tire tracks, digital evidence. They analyzed phone records and vehicle data. The once untouchable Murdaugh name was now under the most intense scrutiny in its history. And beneath it all lingered a chilling possibility that the collapse of a dynasty might not have been caused by outside forces, but from within. For nearly 100 years, the Murdaugh family had shaped justice in their region. Now, justice was circling back. And as financial crime surfaced, as insurance schemes unraveled, as lawsuits mounted and public trust evaporated, one question grew louder. What happens when a man who controls the system begins to lose everything? By late 2021, the image of Alex Murdaugh had transformed from respected attorney to accused fraudster. Yet even then, few could imagine just how far the allegations would go. Because hidden inside a single cell phone video, recorded casually at a dog kennel minutes before the killings, was a detail that would change everything. A voice. And that voice, prosecutors would later argue, placed Alex Murdaugh at the scene of the murders, contradicting his original alibi. The dynasty had survived scandals before. It had weathered whispers and controversies. But this time, the walls were closing in, and the Lowcountry was about to witness the unthinkable, the fall of a family that once seemed above the law. When investigators pulled data from Paul Murdaugh's cell phone, they weren't searching for a confession. They were building a timeline. In the hours before Maggie and Paul were killed, Paul had been recording a short video at the dog kennels on the Moselle property. It was ordinary, almost mundane. A friend had asked him to check on a dog's tail injury. Paul filmed the animal inside the kennel, sending proof that he had followed through. But in the background of that 50-second clip, 3 voices could be heard. Paul's, Maggie's, and a third. For months, Alex Murdaugh insisted he had not been at the kennels that night. He told investigators he had stayed inside the house before driving to visit his mother. He repeated that story to friends, to law enforcement, to anyone who asked. Yet audio experts enhanced the kennel video, and the third voice sounded unmistakable. It sounded like Alex. Friends and family members were asked to listen. Several identified the voice as his. The man who had said he wasn't there, who had placed himself away from the scene, now appeared to be standing just feet away from his wife and son minutes before they were shot. The timeline narrowed to seconds. At 8:44 p.m., Paul's phone recorded the kennel video. At 8:49 p.m., his phone locked forever. No calls, no texts, no movement. Maggie's phone showed similar patterns. After 8:49 p.m., her steps stopped. Her messages went unread. Prosecutors would later argue that between those minutes, between casual conversation about a dog and the silence that followed, everything changed. But that wasn't the only problem for Alex. Vehicle data from his SUV revealed a burst of activity shortly after the phones went dark. Steps counted rapidly on his device. The car engine started. Speed increased as he drove away from Moselle toward his mother's home. For a man who claimed he had been calmly napping inside the house before leaving, the digital evidence painted a different picture, one of urgency. And then there was the raincoat. During a search of his mother's home, investigators discovered a blue rain jacket tucked inside a closet. Forensic analysis later suggested gunshot residue particles were present. Prosecutors theorized it may have been used to conceal evidence or protect clothing from blood spatter. Alex's defense team pushed back hard. They argued that residue could transfer in many ways, that the kennel video was being overinterpreted, that grief could explain inconsistencies. But inconsistencies were mounting. When confronted with the kennel audio, Alex eventually admitted he had lied about being at the kennels. He claimed paranoia from opioid addiction had made him distrustful of investigators. He insisted he left Maggie and Paul alive when he drove away. The lie, he said, was born from fear, not guilt. Still, the weight of deception was heavy. Meanwhile, the financial investigation exploded. Prosecutors uncovered evidence that Alex had allegedly stolen millions from clients, law partners, and vulnerable families. One of the most disturbing cases involved the sons of the Murdaugh family's longtime housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield. After she died in what was described as a fall at the family home, Alex encouraged her sons to file a claim against his insurance. The settlement totaled more than $4 million. The sons say they never saw the money. Investigators alleged Alex diverted the funds into accounts he controlled, using a fake business name to disguise the transfers. The pattern repeated again and again: settlement money rerouted, checks forged, clients deceived. By the time the murder charges were filed in July 2022, Alex Murdaugh was already facing dozens of financial crime indictments. The state's theory became chillingly simple. The murders were a desperate distraction. Prosecutors argued that on June 7, 2021, Alex was on the brink of exposure. Earlier that very day, a colleague confronted him about missing legal fees. A forensic accounting review was looming. Civil litigation tied to the boat crash threatened to reveal his finances. The walls were closing in. And then, that night, Maggie and Paul were dead. In court, prosecutors laid out their case piece by piece. They argued that Alex used two family firearms, a shotgun for Paul and a .300 blackout-style rifle for Maggie. They suggested he moved quickly, attempting to create confusion by using separate weapons. They pointed to the kennel video as the cornerstone, proof he had lied about his alibi. They highlighted his rapid trip to his mother's home immediately after the estimated time of death. They questioned why he called Maggie repeatedly after driving away, as though attempting to establish distance. The defense countered with reasonable doubt. They emphasized the lack of direct eyewitnesses, the absence of blood-stained clothing conclusively tied to Alex. They argued that investigators focused too narrowly on one suspect, ignoring other potential motives connected to the boat crash or financial disputes. But the jury was listening, and so was the nation. For 6 weeks in early 2023, the trial unfolded in a South Carolina courtroom packed with reporters. Testimony stretched across forensic experts, law enforcement officers, financial analysts, and family friends. Then came the moment few expected. Alex Murdaugh took the stand. In a risky move, he testified in his own defense. He admitted to lying about being at the kennels. He admitted to stealing money. He admitted to deceiving clients and colleagues. But he denied murder. "I would never hurt Maggie," he said. "I would never hurt Paul." Under cross-examination, prosecutors pressed him relentlessly. They replayed the kennel video. They questioned his opioid addiction claims. They dissected his timeline down to the minute. The man who once commanded courtrooms now sat under their scrutiny. Observers noted shifts in tone, from sorrow to defensiveness, from tears to precision. Every word was weighed, every pause analyzed. Outside the courthouse, locals who had grown up revering the Murdaugh name watched history unfold. The dynasty that had shaped justice for generations was now fighting for survival. And as closing arguments approached, the prosecution delivered its final blow. Lies matter. They argued that innocent people don't lie about being at a murder scene minutes before their loved ones are killed. They argued that financial ruin provided motive. They argued that power, once absolute, had morphed into desperation. Inside the jury room, 12 strangers were tasked with deciding the fate of a man who had once seemed untouchable. The verdict would not just determine guilt. It would determine whether a century of influence could withstand the weight of evidence or collapse under it. And as the courthouse doors closed for deliberation, one truth hung heavy in the air. The voice on that video could not be unheard. On March 2, 2023, after less than 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The courtroom in Colleton County was silent as the clerk read the verdicts. Guilty. Guilty on 2 counts of murder. For nearly a century, the Murdaugh family name had been synonymous with prosecution, with authority, with control over the courtroom itself. Now, the man who once stood beside juries, asking them to convict others, was standing before one as a convicted murderer. Alex Murdaugh showed little movement as the words landed. No visible shock. No dramatic outburst. Just a subtle nod, as if the outcome, in some quiet corner of his mind, had always been possible. The judge sentenced him the following day to 2 consecutive life sentences, without the possibility of parole. Power, money, legacy. None of it followed him out of that courtroom. But the story didn't end with the verdict. In the weeks that followed, the broader scope of Alex's financial crimes came into sharper focus. Prosecutors detailed how millions of dollars had flowed through shell accounts and fabricated entities. Clients who had trusted him during their most vulnerable moments, after accidents, after losses, discovered that settlements meant to secure their futures had vanished. Some victims testified that they had believed Alex was helping them, that he was protecting them, that he was their advocate. Instead, investigators described a pattern stretching back more than a decade, a slow siphoning of funds that financed a lifestyle far beyond what even a successful attorney could reasonably sustain. Beachfront properties, private planes, expensive renovations, mounting debts. By the time the murder trial began, Alex faced nearly 100 separate financial charges. In late 2023, he pleaded guilty to many of them in both state and federal court, receiving additional prison sentences that ensured he would likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. The dynasty was over. But what drove it to collapse remains the question that continues to haunt observers. During the trial, prosecutors framed the murders as a desperate act, a calculated attempt to buy time. They argued that sympathy from a tragic double homicide might deflect scrutiny from the unraveling financial fraud. That chaos could delay exposure. The defense insisted the state had built a circumstantial case. They emphasized the absence of direct, forensic proof tying Alex physically to the trigger. No eyewitnesses. No definitive murder weapon recovered. Yet the jury had spoken. Much of the prosecution's strength rested on patterns of deception. They argued that lies about being at the kennels weren't small mistakes. They were consciousness of guilt. And the kennel video, that brief, ordinary clip of a dog with an injured tail, became one of the most powerful pieces of evidence in modern criminal trials. A casual recording, a background voice, a digital timestamp that narrowed a window of time to mere minutes. It was technology, not testimony, that pierced the shield of legacy. Outside the courthouse, reactions were divided. Some locals expressed sorrow, not just for Maggie and Paul, but for the collapse of a family that had shaped their community for generations. Others felt vindicated, believing the verdict marked a long overdue reckoning. Nationally, the case became a symbol of something larger, the illusion that influence can outpace accountability. The Murdaugh firm rebranded. Portraits came down. The legal empire fractured. And in the quiet aftermath, new layers of tragedy emerged. Buster Murdaugh, the surviving son, now carries a name that once commanded respect and now carries stigma. Civil lawsuits tied to the boat crash and financial crimes continue to ripple through the courts. The death of Mallory Beach in 2019, the night that first fractured the family's image, remains a painful thread woven through the narrative. Her family reached settlements, but no resolution can undo the events that began that February evening. In prison interviews and filings, Alex has maintained his innocence in the murders. Appeals have been initiated, alleging jury misconduct and evidentiary concerns. Legal battles continue, though the life sentences remain in place. For some, the case is about greed. For others, addiction. For others still, it is about unchecked power. What happens when generations of influence create a belief that consequences are negotiable? But beneath all legal arguments lies a more human reality. Two lives ended in a dark corner of a property that once symbolized privilege. Maggie and Paul Murdaugh are often reduced to footnotes in a story dominated by scandal. Yet they were more than evidence in a courtroom. They were a mother and son whose final moments were captured unknowingly on a cell phone video. A laugh, a conversation about a dog, and then silence. In the end, the Murdaugh case forces an uncomfortable reflection on how systems function, and sometimes fail, when reputation replaces scrutiny. For decades, the family name moved quietly through corridors of power. Deals were struck, cases were won, influence accumulated. But in a digital age, legacies are no longer insulated from data. Cell phones record, vehicles log speed, financial transfers leave trails. And the smallest detail, a background voice on a 50-second clip, can dismantle a century of authority. The courthouse in Hampton County still stands. The marshlands of the Lowcountry still stretch across quiet roads. Life, outwardly, continues much as it always has. Yet something fundamental shifted. The idea that certain names are untouchable. The belief that wealth guarantees protection. The assumption that history can shield the present. Power built the dynasty. Money sustained it. But evidence, quiet, precise, undeniable, brought it down. And as the prison doors closed behind Alex Murdaugh, one truth echoed louder than any family legacy ever could. No dynasty outruns the record.